The year was 2041, and Earth was teetering on the edge. The great powers of the world had long ago abandoned diplomacy in favor of cold, calculating power plays, and the threat of a global war was no longer a matter of if, but when. The United States, China, and Russia were locked in a bitter race for resources, technology, and supremacy. The Middle East, as always, was a volatile powder keg, while Europe struggled to hold together amidst rising nationalism. The world seemed like a tinderbox, ready to ignite at any moment. At the heart of it all was a discovery that shook the foundations of human understanding. Dr. Lila Carlson, a brilliant astrophysicist, had spent the last decade working on a project that no one had taken seriously. A project to scan distant stars and planets for signs of intelligent life. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, had been a scientific pursuit for over a century, but funding and support had dwindled in recent years. People had grown skeptical, even jaded, but Lila had never stopped believing. In 2041, after years of painstaking analysis, Lila and her team finally intercepted a signal, a sequence of binary code that, at first, appeared to be nothing more than random noise. But after running it through their advanced algorithms, they realized something far more extraordinary. The code was a message. It wasn't just a message, but a warning. The message came from an unknown source in the distant reaches of the galaxy, originating from a star system that, according to their calculations, was far beyond the reach of any human-made technology. The signal was encoded in a way that suggested it had been crafted by an intelligence far superior to humanity's. Lila's first instinct was disbelief. Could it be real? Could it be a hoax, or a cosmic anomaly? But as the message was decoded, it became impossible to ignore. The message was clear, its meaning undeniable. It was a law, a cosmic law. The message, once translated, read, "Any species that becomes too aggressive will be destroyed." Lila stared at the screen in disbelief. She wasn't sure if she was shaking from excitement or fear. The implications were staggering. Was humanity being watched? Were other civilizations out there, silently observing, waiting for the right moment to intervene? As she delved deeper into the code, the message unfolded like a warning from the past. It spoke of an ancient race of beings so advanced that they had traveled the cosmos, observing the rise and fall of countless civilizations. These beings, it seemed, had encountered the same problem time and time again. Species that became too aggressive, too obsessed with power, self-destruction inevitably followed. And so, they had established the law, a cosmic law that would ensure the survival of the universe by eradicating those who threatened the balance. The message continued. We have seen it before. It begins with the rise of hostility. The seeds of war are planted, and conflict spreads like a virus. Those who fight for dominance will be consumed by their own greed. It is inevitable. We have intervened before. We will intervene again. If you follow the path of destruction, you will cease to exist. Lila's mind raced. The timing was almost too perfect. Earth was on the brink of war. And now, out of nowhere, this message appeared, warning them about their fate. Was it just a coincidence, or was this a warning that humanity had no choice but to heed? In her moment of shock, she realized something even more terrifying. The countdown had already begun. As the days passed, Lila's discovery was leaked to the media. At first, people were skeptical, but the message was so precise, so impossible to ignore, that it quickly gained traction. Governments around the world scrambled to interpret the meaning of the warning. Some dismissed it as a hoax, while others considered it a threat from a highly advanced alien race. But as more scientists verified the authenticity of the signal, panic began to spread. Lila was thrust into the center of the storm. World leaders requested her expertise. Military factions demanded access to the data, and civilians clamored for answers. The countdown had begun, and humanity had to confront the terrifying possibility that their actions, their aggression, could lead to their extinction. In the midst of this chaos, Lila received an encrypted message, a message that, for reasons unknown, was sent directly to her. It read, The clock is ticking. You have less than 1 year to change the path of your world. Choose wisely. The message was signed, simply, The Watchers. Lila's heart raced as she stared at the words. The message was clear. The end was near, and the cosmic law was not something that could be ignored. But could humanity change its course in time? The world, already on the edge of war, now faced the ultimate question. Would they heed the warning, or would their destructive instincts lead them to their doom? As the countdown continued, no one knew the answer. But Lila Carlson understood one thing for certain. The fate of humanity rested on a knife's edge. As the days following the message stretched into weeks, the world found itself divided. The discovery of the cosmic law sparked a frenzy of debates, some calling it a hoax, others seeing it as humanity's final warning. Governments scrambled to find a way to manage the growing panic, but one thing was certain: the message could not be ignored. Lila Carlson became both a hero and a prisoner. The scientific community clamored to interview her, while world leaders demanded that she help interpret the alien signal. The US president, the leaders of China, and Russia's prime minister all sought her counsel. But the pressure was relentless, and Lila, who had spent her life focused on the stars, now found herself in the crosshairs of the most dangerous forces on Earth. The first few days of intense global discussions had been chaotic. Skeptics in political and military circles downplayed the message as a misunderstanding or an elaborate prank. However, as more and more data came in confirming the signal's authenticity, even the most hardened leaders began to take it seriously. They couldn't afford to ignore the possibility that some higher intelligence had delivered a cosmic ultimatum. Behind the scenes, the world's military leaders began preparing for the worst-case scenario. In secret meetings, generals and strategists debated what the message meant for Earth's defense. Was this a threat from an alien race, waiting for humanity to make a single misstep so they could intervene? Or was the message more like a cosmic set of natural laws, an unspoken truth about the universe, handed down by civilizations who had long since passed? But one thing was universally agreed upon. The message was more than just a warning, it was a countdown. When the first ticking clock appeared on the global network, people panicked. The Watchers' final words had not been a metaphor. They had been literal. As Lila and a team of scientists worked around the clock to decode more of the message, they discovered a shocking revelation hidden within the data. The cosmic law wasn't just some abstract rule governing the universe. It was connected to a precise timeline. The message contained a countdown, marking the exact moment when Earth would face the consequences of its aggression. The countdown began at 365 days, exactly 1 year from the first discovery of the signal. At first, many brushed it off as psychological manipulation, a form of extraterrestrial psychological warfare. The governments of the world rallied their people with promises of unity and diplomacy, of ways to avoid conflict and return to peaceful cooperation. But the leaders' words fell flat. The fears of war between the global powers were so real that no one could believe peace was possible anymore. The countdown ticked on. The United Nations convened in an emergency session, and representatives from all nations gathered to debate how to respond to the message. At first, the rhetoric was hopeful. We have 1 year to avert disaster. 1 year to change course. We must work together. But those who had the most to lose, those in the highest echelons of power, quickly began to diverge. Leaders like President Thomas Callaway of the United States and Premier Mei Ling of China clashed over how to handle the situation. The threat of the Watchers was real, but so were their countries' interests. Global tension was rising even faster than the clock. Across the world, the public grew increasingly paranoid. People found comfort in the idea that it was only a matter of time before someone else would make the first move toward peace. But peace, as the days passed, seemed more and more impossible. The countdown, ticking down every second, forced the world's eyes to the one thing humanity had long avoided: its own aggression. It was almost as if the Watchers had been watching for millennia, waiting for the perfect moment when humans would finally push too far. The United States and China's military forces had been growing more hostile, with each side testing the other, flexing their military muscles. Russia, too, was increasing its presence near the Arctic, exploiting newly accessible oil reserves. With 300 days left on the countdown, satellite images revealed a troubling new development: increased missile testing in the Korean Peninsula, an uptick in naval patrols near disputed islands in the South China Sea, and major military buildups in both Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Every nation that had long been a flashpoint for conflict now felt more on edge than ever. For Lila, the pressure was mounting. She found herself in the center of an impossible storm. She had become a reluctant symbol of hope and despair. World leaders and military generals sent her conflicting requests, asking her to interpret the message, to tell them what to do next. Some wanted her to find a way to prove that the message was a hoax. Others wanted her to confirm that the cosmic law was real, to validate their fears, so they could justify militarizing Earth's defenses. But the truth was, Lila didn't know. What if the law was real? What if the Watchers had seen this all before? What if humanity was already too far gone? One night, as Lila sat in a dimly lit office at the United Nations, reviewing the decoded data, she received a communication from an unexpected source. A shadowy figure known only as Zero. Zero was an independent entity, rumored to have access to classified information from alien sources, and someone who had been following Lila's work closely. The message was simple, but its impact was profound. You have no time left. They are already watching. If you continue down the path you're on, the countdown will reach zero. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Who was Zero? And what did they mean by they? The answer came faster than she could have imagined. The message was not just a warning anymore. It was a ticking time bomb, one that was about to go off whether humanity was ready or not. With 200 days left, the countdown continued its relentless march. And, for the first time, Lila understood the full weight of the message. The clock wasn't just counting down to disaster. It was counting down to something even more terrifying: extinction. As the countdown continued, a deep divide spread across the globe. Humanity was being torn apart, not just by the fear of the cosmic law, but by the growing tensions between the world's most powerful nations. The signal, the warning, and the inevitable consequences of humanity's aggression had exposed deep fissures within the global order. Fissures that now threatened to fracture the very fabric of human civilization. The United States and China, already embroiled in a bitter struggle for dominance in both economic and military power, were locked in an escalating diplomatic deadlock. President Callaway's administration made an uncharacteristic call for unity, proposing a global summit to prevent war and address the threat posed by the alien message. But China's president, Mei Ling, was less inclined to compromise. "Do we trust the message from unknown entities?" she asked during a televised speech. "Who are these watchers? How can we be sure they are not manipulating us? We must look out for our own interests first, or we will be destroyed by our enemies on this earth, not some cosmic law." The words resonated deeply with the Chinese population, many of whom had long been wary of foreign interference. Mei Ling's rhetoric was firm. A powerful China would ensure its survival, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, in Russia, President Ivanov took a more aggressive stance. "We have been here before," he declared. "The West is always plotting, always seeking dominance. We cannot let them have the upper hand. If the cosmic law says we will be destroyed for our aggression, then we should meet it head on. Better to fight with everything we have than to die without a fight." The rhetoric of nationalism was spreading like wildfire. Each nation, each leader, was acting in their own self-interest. The world, fractured by years of geopolitical tension and distrust, could not unite in the face of a common threat. In the middle of this turmoil, Lila Carlson found herself overwhelmed. The scientists who had initially worked with her to decode the alien message were now scattered across the world, each with their own interpretations of the law. Some believed the message was meant to be a wake-up call, that humanity had a year to change its path and prove it could work together. Others, like the renowned astrobiologist Dr. Samuel Holt, argued that the Watchers had already made their decision and that no amount of diplomacy could change the inevitable outcome. Lila sat alone in her office late one night, reviewing her notes and staring at the countdown clock on the screen. 180 days. She had spent sleepless nights analyzing every detail of the cosmic law, but the answers remained maddeningly unclear. The message was simple in its wording, but the implications were far more complex. The Watchers seemed to be warning of an unavoidable consequence. A species that became too aggressive would be wiped out. But the question remained: how would the Watchers enforce this law? What mechanism did they have at their disposal? And how could humanity avoid triggering it? Lila's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, someone she hadn't seen in months. It was David Sinclair, a former colleague and the one person who had always been her most trusted confidant. He had left the scientific community years ago to work in the private sector, but now, standing before her, his face was drawn with anxiety. "Lila," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you need to see this." He handed her a tablet, and she quickly skimmed the contents. The screen displayed a series of encrypted transmissions, but what caught her attention was the message embedded within them. "We have observed your world. The countdown has already begun. If you do not act, the consequences will be irreversible." It was from Zero. Lila's heart raced. "What is this?" she whispered. David's eyes were filled with worry. "It's the truth, Lila. Zero is not some rogue agent. It's an organization, a coalition of individuals from all over the world, working behind the scenes. They've had access to classified information for years, and now they believe the cosmic law is real." Lila felt her breath catch. "You're saying Zero has been watching us this entire time?" David nodded. "They've been tracking the countdown. They've been gathering intel on how close we are to self-destruction. And from what they've learned, they believe humanity is already on the brink. The cosmic law isn't a theoretical risk anymore. It's real, and we're running out of time." Suddenly, a deep rumbling sound echoed from outside the building. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, vibrating the walls. Lila and David rushed to the window and looked out over the city. Far in the distance, a series of flashes lit up the night sky. "Missile tests," Lila muttered, her voice tight with fear. "They're preparing for war." David grabbed her arm. "This is it. The aggression is escalating. If we don't stop it now, the cosmic law will take effect. We've already triggered the countdown." The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if the very planet was reacting to the madness unfolding on its surface. But as the countdown clock ticked closer to zero, something else was happening. A strange phenomenon began to unfold across the globe, an eerie, unexplained event that seemed to be linked to the message. Satellites and communications networks around the world began to experience glitches, unusual distortions in the atmosphere. Scientists couldn't explain it, and then, on the 150th day, a series of bizarre signals began to appear in the skies over major cities. Unidentified flying objects, sleek, metallic craft, hovered for brief moments before disappearing in flashes of light. Governments scrambled to issue explanations, but nothing made sense. It was as if the Watchers were already observing humanity, preparing to intervene. Lila's heart sank. The message, the countdown, and now this. Everything was converging toward one terrifying conclusion. The aggression of the world's superpowers was no longer a matter of national politics. It had become a cosmic reality, and if humanity did not change its ways, extinction was no longer a theory. As the countdown continued, Lila understood one thing: the time to act had passed. The fate of humanity now rested in the hands of those who had the courage to challenge the very nature of human aggression. The tension across the globe had reached a breaking point. As the countdown dwindled to a mere 120 days, a sense of hopelessness clung to humanity like an oppressive fog. Despite all the warnings, the tensions between the superpowers continued to escalate, each side daring the other to blink first. Leaders scrambled to create alliances, but the distrust was palpable. The clock was ticking, but no one could agree on what to do. The sightings of the metallic craft, the UFOs, had intensified in the weeks leading up to the 120th day. While some still dismissed them as advanced military technology, most agreed that these were not human-made. The craft appeared over key global flashpoints: Washington, Moscow, Beijing, Tel Aviv, and even the troubled zones of Eastern Europe and the South China Sea. They would hover silently for moments, then vanish without a trace. As bizarre as it was, one thing was clear: the Watchers were not just watching anymore. They were actively monitoring humanity's every move. Lila, having been thrust into the heart of this global crisis, could no longer hide behind scientific rationality. The evidence was overwhelming, and the law was undeniable. Humanity was on the verge of becoming the next casualty in the galaxy's history of self-destruction. But even as the realization of impending doom settled over her like a dark cloud, a strange and unexpected ally emerged. Zero, the mysterious group Lila had heard of in whispered conversations, was becoming more vocal. Their operatives contacted her directly, urging her to meet. They claimed to have critical information about the Watchers and how to stop the countdown before it was too late. One cold evening, Lila boarded a private jet to an undisclosed location. The destination: a remote facility in the Swiss Alps. The flight was silent, the air thick with anticipation. David Sinclair, who had been working alongside Zero, accompanied her. He had told her that Zero was the last hope. If anyone had the power to decipher the Watchers' true intentions, it was this enigmatic organization. The private facility, nestled deep within the mountains, looked unassuming from the outside. But inside, it was a well-guarded compound, far removed from the political chaos of the world. Lila and David were ushered into a high-tech conference room where several key members of Zero were waiting. They were an eclectic group of scientists, former intelligence officers, and experts in fields ranging from quantum physics to psychology. At the head of the table sat a man known only as the Architect, the leader of Zero. His true identity remained a secret, but his influence was undeniable. Lila sat down across from him, her mind racing with questions. "What is it you've learned about the Watchers?" she asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. The Architect folded his hands, his face unreadable. "The cosmic law you've decoded, Lila. It's not just about the aggression of humanity. It's about a deeper principle. The Watchers don't just destroy aggressive species. They intervene when a species' aggression becomes a fundamental threat to the stability of the cosmos itself. They act as a form of cosmic balance." Lila felt a chill in her spine. "So, this is about more than just us? It's about the entire universe?" The Architect nodded slowly. "Exactly. You see, the Watchers were once a part of a vast cosmic empire. But they realized that their own species, along with others, had come to the brink of annihilation because of unchecked aggression. They came to a terrifying conclusion. Aggression, unchecked and unchecked, would eventually lead to the destruction of entire star systems. Not just the aggressors, but everything they touched. And so they created the law, a safeguard against total annihilation." David spoke up, his voice grave. "But the law isn't just a deterrent, is it? The Watchers don't just observe, they intervene. When a species reaches a certain tipping point, they take action. The countdown we're facing is not some passive warning. The Watchers have the means to eradicate us if we don't change our path." Lila's thoughts raced. How do we stop it? Is there anything we can do to reverse the process? The Architect's eyes darkened. That's the problem. The Watchers have a built-in mechanism, a fail-safe. They don't just observe. They intervene at the critical moment, when the aggression reaches a tipping point. The problem is, they've been watching humanity for a long time. Longer than you think. And every time you come close to destroying yourselves, they've stepped in. They've allowed you to survive. But the cosmic law is clear. If you continue down this path of self-destruction, there will be no intervention. No mercy. Lila's heart dropped. "So, we've reached the tipping point?" The architect didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed a button on the table, and a holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of the world. It was a timeline, a history of humanity's aggression, from the first global wars to the current rise of military tensions. The countdown, the law, was not just an arbitrary measure. It had been building for centuries. "This is the moment," the architect said quietly. "This is the final push. The Watchers have already begun their process of intervention. They're not just watching anymore, they're preparing to act. Humanity's fate is now in your hands, Lila. You need to find a way to stop it." Lila's breath caught in her throat. "You're saying we can stop it?" The architect nodded. "The key lies in understanding the true nature of aggression. The Watchers know that humanity's aggression is not just about military conflicts. It's a fundamental part of your nature, your drive for dominance, your greed, your need to conquer. But there is hope. If humanity can shift its focus, redirect that energy into something positive, something that aligns with the greater harmony of the cosmos, the countdown could be reversed. But it must happen now. The Watchers will only give you one final opportunity." Lila sat in stunned silence. She had hoped for a solution, some form of intervention, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. The weight of what was happening, what was about to happen, was unbearable. As the hours passed, Lila and David absorbed as much information as they could from Zero. They learned of other civilizations that had faced the same fate, civilizations that had either fallen or managed to change their ways just in time. The Watchers had intervened before, but never on such a large scale. Earth was their final test. As they left the facility, Lila felt a strange sense of resolve. The world was at a precipice, and there was no turning back. In the final days of the countdown, humanity had to make a choice: to continue down its path of aggression and destruction, or to find a way to unite, to shift away from their destructive impulses, and prove that they could build something more than just conflict. With only 90 days left, the clock was ticking, and humanity's last chance was slipping away. The question remained: could they change in time, or would they prove the Watchers right? Would they be destroyed by their own aggression, or would they rise above it? The broken seal of humanity's future had been opened. The outcome would depend on the courage of those willing to face the truth. As the countdown dipped below 90 days, the world became an ever-tightening knot of anxiety and mistrust. The fragile threads of diplomacy, already strained, began to snap under the weight of mounting pressure. Leaders who had once promised unity were now turning on each other, and the global community teetered on the edge of collapse. Lila Carlson and David Sinclair found themselves at the center of an increasingly fractured world. They had received Zero's warning, and their message was clear: humanity had one last chance to change course. But even with the truth of the cosmic law hanging over them, the response from world leaders was mixed, often contradictory, and fueled by desperation. After returning from the Swiss Alps, Lila had tried to share the revelations with the global community, hoping to unite them against the common threat of the Watchers' intervention. But the moment she began speaking about the fundamental shift in humanity's path, about redirecting its aggression and focusing on unity, cooperation, and a higher moral vision, those in power quickly dismissed her. "The Watchers are an unknown force," President Callaway of the United States declared during an emergency meeting of the United Nations. "We cannot allow fear of an alien species to dictate our policies. We need to focus on protecting our nations, not indulging in naive idealism." Callaway's words were echoed by Premier Mei Ling of China, who, despite acknowledging the threat of cosmic intervention, insisted that her nation could not be held hostage by such abstract concepts. "We are a great civilization," she declared. "We cannot simply allow ourselves to be dictated to by unknown forces. Our survival depends on our strength." In Moscow, President Ivanov was even more blunt: "We will not cower before some alien law. Our power will not be compromised. Russia will take the necessary steps to ensure we are not destroyed. The law is a myth until proven otherwise." The rhetoric of nationalism and self-preservation intensified. While some diplomatic factions within the UN were trying to forge an agreement to pursue peaceful measures, their voices were drowned out by those who feared any weakness in the face of the cosmic law. Countries were arming themselves, and military tensions were reaching fever pitch. Alliances were forming, but they were alliances forged in distrust and fear, not in the spirit of cooperation. For Lila and David, the situation was becoming dire. They knew the only way to stop the cosmic law from triggering was for humanity to come together, to acknowledge the destructive force of their aggression and find a path to harmony. But instead, humanity was entrenching itself deeper into the trenches of its own warlike instincts. The world was spiraling into chaos, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. Lila sat in her office at the United Nations one afternoon, staring at the holographic display of the countdown clock. 75 days left. Every moment felt like a countdown to oblivion. She had spent countless hours reviewing Zero's information, trying to find any possible solution, any way to turn the tide. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized the truth. Humanity was not only incapable of seeing the threat clearly, it was actively choosing to ignore it. A harsh knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. David entered, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, tossing a tablet onto the desk. Lila took it, her stomach sinking as she saw the headline. World powers ready for full-scale conflict. Military buildup reaches unprecedented levels. China and the United States are on the brink of war, David continued. The war games are already happening. Russia's mobilizing its forces. The countdown is making everyone paranoid. Some leaders are seeing this as a sign of strength, not weakness. They re-gearing up for the fight of their lives. The implications were chilling. Lila had hoped that the Watcher's warning would be enough to prevent a global war. But it seemed that the message had been twisted, misunderstood as a challenge, rather than a warning. "We have to do something," Lila said, her voice tense. "This cannot go on. If they don't change direction, if they keep going down this path, the cosmic law will take effect, and humanity will be wiped out before we even know what hit us." David paced across the room, his mind racing. "Maybe we should go public. Maybe if we show people the truth about Zero's findings, about the Watchers, it'll be enough to force change." Lila shook her head. "No, too many people still think it's a hoax. And if we reveal too much, it could trigger panic. If we don't have solid proof that the Watchers are real, and that they can and will act, we'll be labeled as conspiracists." The frustration was unbearable. Lila had never imagined that the final battle for humanity's survival would be fought in the minds of its people, not on some far-off battlefield. But as the global military buildup continued, something else was happening, something even more troubling. Small-scale incidents were beginning to occur across the globe. Skirmishes between military forces, sabotage in research facilities, black market arms trades flourishing. All of it pointed to one thing. Humanity's aggression wasn't just on the rise. It was spilling into every corner of society. It was a fever that no one could stop, and the clock kept ticking. On the 60th day, an unexpected transmission from Zero arrived at the United Nations. It wasn't a warning this time, it was an ultimatum. The Watchers will no longer wait. Your aggression has already reached the tipping point. The intervention has begun. If you do not stop, we will act, and there will be no going back. The law is clear. Lila felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. The Watchers were no longer passive observers. The intervention had begun. "We're running out of time," she said, turning to David, her eyes wide with the enormity of what had just occurred. "This is it, the final countdown." David's jaw tightened. "Then we'll do whatever it takes. We have to make people understand. We have to stop this, before it's too late." Lila's mind raced. There was no longer any time for diplomacy. There was no longer any time to convince the leaders of the world to set aside their egos and come together. Humanity had already crossed a line, and now, they had to face the consequences of their choices. As the final days of the countdown loomed closer, Lila knew the path ahead was uncertain. The world was on the edge of a precipice, and the divide was deeper than ever. Would humanity choose cooperation, or would the Watchers decide for them? Time was slipping away, and in the dark silence of space, the Watchers were waiting. The days slipped by like grains of sand falling through an hourglass, each moment a reminder that the end was near. The world, caught in the tightening grip of fear and distrust, had lost its ability to communicate, let alone cooperate. The clock continued its unforgiving countdown, the minutes shrinking into hours, the hours into days. With only 30 days remaining, the global situation had reached a fever pitch. The brink of war was no longer a distant concern, it was imminent. Lila Carlson and David Sinclair stood in the heart of the United Nations Assembly Hall, a place that had once symbolized hope and diplomacy. Now, it felt like a relic of a bygone era, an echo of a time when cooperation was still possible. The room was filled with tense diplomats, military leaders, and intelligence officers, all locked in heated debate. The voices of those calling for war drowned out the voices of those pleading for peace. The Watchers' intervention is a myth, President Callaway of the United States thundered, his face flushed with anger. We will not bend to the whims of some extraterrestrial force. Our nation's survival depends on strength, and we will not show weakness in the face of this threat. Strength? Premier Mei Ling retorted sharply. Strength is not aggression, Mr. Callaway. Strength is the ability to control your instincts, to make rational decisions. But here we are, on the brink of destroying ourselves, and you still want to play the role of the hero. The tension in the room was palpable. Diplomatic niceties had long since disappeared. The fate of the world hung on the decisions being made in this very room, and yet the leaders of the world were still caught in the web of their own egos, their own thirst for power. Lila, standing near the back of the room, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had worked tirelessly, along with Zero, to make the world understand the true nature of the threat they were facing. But her words had fallen on deaf ears. The clock was ticking, and the world's leaders seemed more interested in asserting their dominance than in saving their people. She turned to David, her expression grim. This is it. They won. Listen. Not to us, not to anyone. If the Watchers are already intervening, we might not have much time left. David nodded, his face tight with frustration. We don't have a choice anymore. It's up to us. If humanity doesn't act now, if we don't convince the world to change, then everything we worked for will be for nothing. Lila looked at the faces of the diplomats, who were still shouting at each other, their voices growing more strident. It was a futile debate, one driven by pride, not reason. Her heart sank. How could they not see it? How could they not understand? Suddenly, a low hum filled the room, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. The air grew thick with static, and the lights flickered as if something enormous were moving just outside the walls of the building. The room fell silent, the arguments forgotten, as every head turned toward the ceiling. Then, a voice, low, resonant, and alien, echoed throughout the hall. This is the Watchers. The time has come. The voice was not spoken through any speakers, nor was it a broadcast. It seemed to come from within the very fabric of the room, inside each person's mind. It was an overwhelming presence, an inescapable reality. Lila's breath caught in her throat. It's real. They're here. We have observed your species. Your aggression has reached a point where it threatens not only your world but the stability of the entire cosmos. Your time has run out. The air seemed to vibrate as if reality itself were being distorted. For a moment, everything felt suspended in time, as if the laws of physics no longer applied. And then, the voice continued. The intervention has begun. The floor beneath Lila's feet seemed to tremble, and a strange, ethereal light filled the room. The walls warped, bending in ways that defied logic. The diplomats, now pale and speechless, stared in horror at the strange phenomenon unfolding around them. Lila's pulse quickened. She glanced at David, who was equally transfixed by the events unfolding before them. There was no denying it anymore. The Watchers had arrived, And their presence was not a negotiation. It was a reckoning. The voice spoke again, more forceful this time. You have failed. You have been given ample opportunity to change your ways. But your species continues to choose the path of destruction. The countdown will reach its final moment, and when it does, your planet will cease to exist. A wave of panic swept through the room as the realization hit everyone like a tidal wave. It was not just a threat. The Watchers had the power to carry it out. They had the power to wipe out humanity in an instant. Lila felt her heart race as she stared at the swirling lights in the center of the room. There was a sense of finality in the air, a crushing certainty that the moment of reckoning had arrived. But then, something strange happened. A ripple of energy pulsed outward from the heart of the room, as if the Watchers were testing humanity's resolve. The lights flickered again, and the holographic map of the Earth that had been projected in the center of the room began to shift. It was as if the planet itself were being examined, its continents, its oceans, its cities, all flashing in and out of view in a dizzying pattern. And then the voice spoke one last time. There is still time, if you choose to act. Lila's heart skipped a beat. The message was clear. The Watchers had not yet fully intervened. They were giving humanity one last chance. But that chance was fading fast. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the pounding of Lila's own heartbeat. The world was at the precipice of extinction, but there was still a possibility, however small, that they could change. She turned to David, a new sense of urgency in her eyes. This is our moment. We have to make them see. We have to make them understand. The Watchers are giving us one last chance to prove we can change. David met her gaze, his eyes burning with determination. We still have a choice, Lila. But it has to happen now. The final countdown was not just a measure of time. It was the measure of humanity's future. With only 30 days remaining, Lila knew that the fate of the world was now entirely in their hands. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. With only 10 days remaining, the tension around the globe was palpable. The intervention of the Watchers had become undeniable, and their ultimatum had sent shockwaves through the world's leaders. The countdown, once an abstract concept, was now a tangible, inescapable reality. The fate of humanity, teetering on the edge of annihilation, now rested on a single, fragile question. Would they change, or would they perish? Lila Carlson and David Sinclair had no illusions left about the gravity of the situation. Their mission had shifted from explaining the threat to ensuring that humanity made a decisive turn. The Watchers had made their move, broadcasting their intentions, showing their power, and offering one last glimmer of hope. But now, every nation was locked in a desperate scramble. Countries were on the brink of collapse. The political landscape had fractured into more hardened factions than ever before, and the Watchers' warning only deepened the divide. The war drums were louder than ever. Each day, new military exercises and retaliatory measures escalated the risks of all-out conflict. But it wasn't just the military threats that haunted Lila. It was the fear of humanity's collective inability to stop the cycle of aggression. The cosmic law was not a mere suggestion. It was the very framework that had determined the survival of countless civilizations. It had already condemned the aggressive species that had failed to change before them. Now it had turned its gaze toward Earth, and the clock was ticking. Lila stood at the window of her temporary residence at the United Nations, gazing out at the skyline of New York City. The once bustling streets were eerily quiet, the usual vibrancy replaced by a kind of collective dread. People knew what was at stake, but the political and ideological gridlock was so entrenched that every effort at a peaceful resolution had fallen apart. In the past few days, global protests had erupted in cities around the world, citizens demanding their leaders to act and find common ground. But the divisions ran deep. What had once been a united cry for peace had splintered into a series of competing voices. Some were calling for unilateral military action to confront the Watchers, while others, like the Zero Group, were still advocating for a radical shift, cooperation, diplomacy, and abandonment of the path of aggression. But the progress was slow. Too slow. David entered the room, his expression grim. It's no use, Lila. Every major world power is preparing for some kind of defensive or offensive action. The lines are drawn in the sand, and the moment the countdown reaches 0, they'll push the button. We can't change their minds anymore. Lila turned to face him, her voice quiet but determined. There's always a way. The Watchers gave us a choice, David. They didn't say it was too late. They said there was still time. And I believed them. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to believe that too. But the truth is, even if we could somehow unite the world now, it might be too little too late. We've waited for too long. The Watchers, these cosmic forces, they're not just warning us anymore. The energy I felt that day, the intervention is real. It's happening, Lila. Lila's eyes narrowed. Then let's force them to listen. We can't keep waiting for the world's leaders to make a decision. We've got to make the decision ourselves. The Watchers showed us a path. It's not just about abandoning war. It's about changing the very way we think, our whole approach to how we live on this planet. David looked at her, skepticism written on his face. And what do you think we can do, Lila? They're preparing for full-scale warfare. The world's military systems are on high alert. How do you change that in a matter of days? How? Lila took a deep breath, trying to push back the fear gnawing at her. She knew this was the most critical moment. The Watchers' ultimatum, their intervention, it wasn't a mere formality, it was a test. A test of humanity's ability to evolve or face total annihilation. It was the final question, and humanity had only one chance to answer it. I'm not sure, she said, but I think the answer lies with the people. The ones who are still protesting. The ones who want peace, who want to change the system. We've been waiting for the leaders to act, but they're too entrenched in their power struggles. But what if the real power lies with the people themselves? What if we could make the masses see that the fight is no longer against each other, but against this cosmic law? That the real enemy is not the Watchers, but our own destructive instincts? David's eyes narrowed. You're talking about a revolution. A global movement that would force the leaders to listen. But that would take time, Lila. Time we don't have. I know. But what if we make a declaration, a symbolic act, a demonstration of humanity's willingness to change? Something that shows the Watchers that we are evolving, that we are learning from our mistakes? It doesn't have to be perfect. We don't need the entire world to agree immediately, but we need a spark. We need something that shows that we're serious. The Watchers may be watching, but they also gave us the choice. Maybe our choice needs to be more visible. David looked at her, his expression darkening with realization. You want to stage a global movement, a single act of unity that could shift the course of history. One last effort to prove that humanity can overcome its aggression. Lila nodded slowly. Yes, we've seen civilizations destroyed by their own aggression, David. But we've also seen others rise from the ashes because they found a way to transform themselves. This is our last chance to show that humanity can change, before the countdown reaches 0. The plan was dangerous, it was ambitious, but it was all they had left. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. Lila and David worked alongside activists, leaders within Zero, and a small network of influencers who still believed that humanity could change. Together, they crafted the Declaration of Humanity's Future, a call to action that would spread across the globe. It was a bold, symbolic gesture, a public commitment from key governments and organizations to cease all aggressive military actions, to halt the arms buildup, and to start discussions toward an unprecedented global summit on peace and cooperation. As the declaration was made public, something extraordinary began to happen. In the face of impending doom, the world's people, the citizens, the ones who had been protesting, who had been calling for change, rallied together. Protests turned into mass demonstrations, but instead of calling for war, they called for unity. Major cities saw people coming together, hands joined, marching not in defiance, but in hope. The world's leaders, now under intense pressure from their own people, began to change course. Slowly, cautiously, Some nations pulled back from the brink of military conflict, agreeing to open peace talks, guided by the declaration. But would it be enough? The watchers had been clear. They were watching, and their intervention would happen when the final moments arrived. The decision was still in humanity's hands. Lila stood in front of the massive, swirling hologram that projected the countdown clock, watching the numbers tick away. She didn't know if humanity could change in time. But in that moment, as the protests spread and the global movement took shape, she felt something shift, a flicker of hope. The final choice, humanity's final choice, was now in motion. And it was either their redemption or their destruction. The clock was ticking, and the world was waiting to see if humanity had learned enough to save itself.